everyone. You are welcome to Joel Political Blog. And today, as we do on our live session, we discuss issues that affects not just Nigeria and Africa, but issues that have dominated headlines across the globe. Within the last few weeks, there's been massive protests going on in Iran, and then we've seen a lot of reactions to all of these protests. Some have said this protest will mark an end to the Islamic regime that came on board in 1979 in Iran. And some have said these protests have happened 5 times within the last couple of years, and it has not yielded any desired result. But it appears what we are seeing now is assumed a different dimension, and it has called for global consideration. There have been, reactions from the U.S., from other world powers about what is happening in Iran. And within the last few years, due to a lot of international sanctions on Iran, the Iranian economy has really gone down. So bad that a dollar now exchanges for about 1.5 million rial, and due to the sanctions, nobody buys Iranian oil. All we see now is just China that buys the Iranian oil at, of course, a very ridiculous price. And this has really, really affected Iran's economy. And aside that, there have been speculations that Iran have been funding terrorist activities across the Middle East, funding Hezbollah, funding Hamas, and all of that, even with the economic crunch that they have been facing. So, with the current intense protests going on in Iran and the response and the reactions that we have seen from different countries across the globe, particularly the United States of America, is this an end to the Islamic regime in Iran, or is this one of those protests that we've seen that has amounted to nothing? And today I'll be having a guest to discuss this issue with me, and I'll be bringing up the guest shortly so we can discuss this issue, and then we try to make sense. Our guest is someone who is well read, well traveled, and is very, very vast when it comes to issues about international relations, and then issues that has to do with global politics. So he'll be coming on board shortly. And if you have any questions, please, you can just call us on WhatsApp using the number on the screen, and we'll be definitely answer your questions if you have any. So, yes, sir.
Okay. All right.
Yes. I did the introduction now. I'm telling our audience that we're trying to discuss the issues like we have in Iran. The pertinent question, has the end come for the Islamic regime in Iran? Just a little bit of the background story. We talked about the protests that has happened in Iran. Some have said the protests have happened 5 times without any much result. But it appears the protest at this time is more intense compared to the other ones that we've seen happen. And then we've seen reactions from the US and other world powers. And there's a likelihood that Donald Trump will strike in Iran, though that is not a definite decision yet. But troops are now being mobilized towards Iran for a possible military action. So, sir, I just want to ask, do you think this is an end for the Islamic regime in Iran?
Yeah, there are many issues. There are many ways you can look at this point. The first one is that you can argue, and some people have argued, including so many people who believe in the Iranian regime, the regime of the mullahs, which has been in power from 1979 till date. And there are also some world powers such as the Russians and the Chinese who will want to ensure that the regime continues to live. And as a matter of fact, from some reports that came out over the weekend, there were at least 20 huge cargo planes from China that entered Iran, and they were said to be conveying air defense system to help the Iranian government survive. There are also groups around the world, such as the Hezbollah and the Hamas, the Shiites in Iraq, and some of them, including even some sworn enemies of the Shiites, such as the ISIS or Al Qaeda groups that are in Syria, will wish to have the Iranian regime continue to stay. But the situation on the ground has been unrelenting. The fact that the huge, and we have debates about the number of people that have actually been killed, has not deterred people from coming out to the street. Shows that even if this regime does not fall in the next few weeks, its hold on power has been seriously challenged. And the fact that in some cities and regions, the people have taken over military installations and establishments, especially the Kurdish region, where the Kurds have been agitating for some kind of independence. As you know, today the Kurds are split between Syria, Iran, and Iraq. So the regime is now having a challenge that it has never had in its 47 years. Of course, many things you could say from the perspective of those that wish the regime to collapse, that a sustained pressure, the type that Donald Trump, the president of the United States, is putting on them now, shows that it will be difficult for them to survive, really. But you never can tell in human affairs whether 1 + 1 will naturally equal 2, or there may be some circumstances that might be different this time.
Okay, yes, because we've seen that even the Iranian government, they have responded with so much, with extreme force. There's blackout, which has reduced the intensity of the protest. But if America decides to strike Iran because of this protest, do you think it will be justified, or do you think America will be invading the Iranian territory, considering the fact that most countries in the Middle East have not really responded or reacted to what is happening in Iran, and America is saying they will want to help the protesters and all of that? Do you think this attack will be justified by America if they eventually go ahead with this attack?
Yeah, I think, Joel, is all about geopolitics and interest that you have. The ambivalence that is shown by the Gulf countries and the Arab countries, such as the Arab regime in Jordan, because majority of Jordanians don't share the same ethnic affinity with the with the family that is ruling Jordan. If you look at Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and so forth, there's some form of ambivalence. They may have privately advised Trump, as the media reported, not to attack, but I don't believe that they want the Iranian regime to continue in power. Number two is that what people fail to consider when they are looking at the totality of the situation is that the war in the situation in Iran holds a lot of answers to the geopolitical questions around the world, including the war between Russia and Ukraine. For Trump, you recall, and you do know that Iran supplies a lot of weapons, tactical weapons, to the Russian regime, and the Russian regime will have problems in that regard if if the current Iranian regime is taken out of power. If you also look at the situation in China, China gets very cheap oil from Iran, and the cheap oil it gets from Iran will be stopped. And if Trump succeeds, or the Americans succeed in taking out the mullahs in Iran, a lot of issues, the much talk about revolt against the American dollar is going to fall flat, because the Chinese will have to buy oil in dollars and no longer in their currency, which they want to promote. So you also note that the regime in Iran has a lot to do with the trafficking, because some of its trafficking of arms around the Middle East, it is well known that they call them, the Iranians call them axis of resistance, but they have propped up several proxy groups in the Middle East that have threatened not just Israel, but have become a threat to European capitals, and even the United States. Those people will also suffer. And then the people fail to understand that part of what has been happening as far as the narcotic trade is concerned is that some of the terrorist groups in the Middle East have been funneling and been trafficking drugs to European capitals, and which is why you will see the Europeans are behaving like the Arab states. They are quiet, they don't want the regime, but many of them, what they hate is that it is Trump that is leading the war against Iran. I'm sure they would have wished that the regime collapses. Maybe some people that are anti-American within the regime take over power and will play to them and not to the Americans. I think this appeared to me to be some of the geopolitics of the crisis that we have in Iran. I do know that while these are the issues that the geopolitics holds for different regions, as far as the conflict in that country is concerned, it is also clear that on the ground, Iranians appear to be tired of the regime. Iran, you know, from its history, was one of the most advanced countries in the Middle East. Iran is also odd in the Middle East because until the Shiites took over in 1979, it was an old Persian country with a long history that extends beyond Islam, that has been existing, that has resisted Islam and existed up to this time. And the regime, you also note, had good relations with Israel. I mean, that is the Iranian regime before the mullahs took over, had good relations with Israel, to the extent that they were selling oil to Israel. A pipeline, I believe, was even laid from Iran to take fuel to Israel. And Israel was instrumental in helping that country to modernize its Air Force, retrofit some of their fighter jets. And Israel was also involved in the development of the ballistic missiles program in Iran during the Shah, just before the Islamic regime took over in 1979. So there are so many things that are involved in the situation that we have in Iran today.
Yeah, now talking about geopolitics, considering that China is benefiting from Iran in terms of buying source of cheap crude oil If America eventually goes ahead with this threat or with this plan, though not yet confirmed, to attack Iran, what do you think will be the reaction of China in the middle of this?
Even though I think that the regime in Beijing will do everything in its power to stall the collapse of the regime in the Islamic regime in Iran, it will do everything possible to ensure that the regime collapse, or even work towards establishing some elements from within the regime to take over power in Iran. But I doubted whether China will roll out guns to come out openly to fight the United States. If it does so, then would have had the emergence of a World War III, which I doubt whether the Chinese at this point would want to do.
Yeah, I thought about the same thing because I was just looking at because China over the years, because of their in terms of geopolitics and their relation with other countries, they've always maintained the sit on the fence approach when it comes to these issues. That's why when I was having this discussion with somebody, we're talking about what would China, how would China likely react if America goes ahead, to carry out is this. Now, another country that's maintained a little bit of ties with Iran is Russia. And Russia is already right now battling with Ukraine and the issue with NATO and all of that. How do you think Russia will react if America eventually, because we've seen what happened in Venezuela in terms of the abduction of Maduro and all of that. So if America eventually carries out its threat to invade Iran and then help the protesters remove the regime and all of that, how do you think Russia will likely take this?
Yeah, first thing, I think that if this protest continues in Iran up to the fourth week, there will be no coming back for the regime at all. If this protest continues next week, even if the United States does not intervene, I don't see the regime coming back. I don't see. What we may have is what people were trying to prevent by encouraging the United States government not to intervene in Iran. Namely, that if it did intervene and no regime takes over, you are going to have a void which some elements such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS would take advantage of. So if the regime does not collapse in the next 4 weeks and Americans don't intervene, you are not going to have a letdown in the crisis. You are going to have a continuation of the crisis and a possible split, especially the areas that have been agitating for breakaway from agitating for a break from Iran. But I don't see the Russians intervening, even though they wish to intervene, because the Russians, as with the case with the United States, the Russians would not want to have a direct confrontation with the United States. I think they would rather do everything in their power to ensure that the intervention of the United States fails. Having said that, it's also important to note that, and this is my guess, I believe that if Iran collapses, the war between Russia and Ukraine will come to an end, and that there will be a ceasefire if Iran collapses, because Russia will be in more trouble. Apart from the issues of having hardware and the rest of them, the issue that there are reports that they've been helping to rip off the Iranians by also helping them to bypass the sanctions on oil and getting their cuts from it. That will be a problem too, because they will no longer be able to get the oil to use. And of course, as it is now, the pressure that Donald Trump is putting on Europe to stop buying gas and oil from
Iran.
from Russia, the war or the possible defeat of the regime in Iran will provide Europe with some sort of alternative oil that and gas that they could use to reduce their dependence on Russian oil. And as well, I think the Germans too will now be regretting the voluntary destruction of their nuclear power systems, which they did some years ago, because that may be one of the reasons why Germans are so dependent on Russian oil today.
Because this whole thing will for me, I see if the current regime goes down in Iran, I see it will mark a new kind of a watershed in the international system, considering that there will be talks about democracy. And what we had in Iran before was more or less like the king and the monarchy system. So I think there's going to be a reintroduction of democracy in Iran and all of that. And one, according to someone I spoke with a few days ago, talked about that there might be some kind of undertone intervention by the Israeli government in what is happening in Iran today. That some of the protesters, that the Mossad and the rest of them may have infiltrated some people right there and they are carrying out. Do you think we have just 5 more minutes? Do you think Israel has anything, whether directly or indirectly, what is happening in Iran today?
Of course, Israel must be interested at all times in what is happening in Iran, because Iran, as you know, has done what you call a ring of fire, according to them, around Israel, what the Israelis call the ring of terror around Israel. The Hezbollah, the Shia militants in Iraq, the Hamas and Islamic Jihad in West Bank and Gaza, as well as the rebels or some of the groups in Syria. So Israel at every time is interested in what happens in that country. Having said that, Iran too has been interested in what happens in many countries. Every country in the world is interested in what happens in other countries. And so coming to say that Israel is interested also is like not saying anything, because that is what nations do. That is what nations do. Nations intervene in their interests in other nations to get those nations to behave the way they want them to behave. That has been there since the beginning of time. It's not a new thing. But the fact of the matter too is that as far as we do know, Israel and the government in Israel has made announcements several times about its preparedness and has raised alarm that the Iranians will strike them. The Iranians have also said that Israel would go on a preemptive strike. So we are waiting to see which of the countries will fire first. But the fact of the matter is that around the world, I believe that after the regime collapses, there may be spikes of terror attacks by lone wolves, groups that have been injured or individuals that may have lost out in Iran. And so we may have a spike in some individual terror groups in some parts of European capitals and even in the United States. But overall, I do foresee that if you take out a regime whose stated objectives is to wipe Israel out of the surface of the earth, and you know that they had a clock or have a clock in Tehran, a countdown clock that is counting down to when Israel will be wiped out. If you take that regime out and have a regime that is not doing that, there might be some respite in some of the attacks that we have in the Middle East. And I think many Arab countries will be pleasantly surprised, will be happy if they have a regime that is not propping up rebels in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, West Bank, and Gaza, as well as in Iraq. Other Arab countries may be happier with that type of situation.
Yes, and just the last question, because you mentioned Hezbollah and Hamas and the rest of them, and there have been allegations over the years that some of the fundings for these groups has come from Iran. So if there's a regime change,
it's not an allegation. It's not an allegation. It's not an allegation. It's a well-known fact, a notorious fact that has been admitted by both the Hezbollah and the Iranian government. So it's not an allegation. They have been doing that, and they call them the Ring of Fire, and Israel calls them the Ring of Terror.
Okay, so now, given that these fundings have come from the Islamic regime over the last 3 decades, and it has given strength to the Hezbollah and the Hamas and the rest of them. So if there's a regime change, as positive as you are, as I am, that this regime change will come. So do you think, and if the new system comes in Iran and they decide not to toe the line of the Islamic regime by funding these terrorist groups, or because they want to have sanctions removed from Iran so they can prosper, have their rebuild has gone down over the years, do you think that will have serious impact in the activities of Hamas and Hezbollah?
Yeah, I think they have to look for other funding, and I suspect that they have to go into more drugs and gun smuggling around the world. The large arsenal of weapons that they have, they will have to use them to smuggle to other groups. That may happen. But I think for the Iranians, any money that is not spent on sponsoring the so-called Ring of Fire will go into the welfare of Iranians. And I believe that Iran will become, again, a tourist center around the world. It will become a hub where people will go to and have holidays like they used to have in the past. In the past, people used to move from European capitals to Iran for holidays. That traffic will resume. And I think there will be a mass movement of Iranian diaspora back to Iran if the regime collapses.
I agree. I totally agree, because the sanctions and the activities of the Islamic regime has really affected, even within the academia. Academic papers written from Iranian universities are not accepted by journal bodies all over the world, especially countries that have ties to America and the rest of them. So it has really been a very big problem for Iran. And we sincerely hope that this protest will yield the desired result and put Iranians back on the path of progress, back on the path of development, and back on the path of international collaboration. So we hope to see that happen in the coming year. Also, thank you so much, sir, for your insight. This has been absolutely.
Thank you.
United to have this insight about what's happening in Iran, and hopefully we'll keep tabs with what's happening, and then when new developments come, then we'll see what. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so this marks an end to our discussions today. And please, you can like, follow, and share. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on our social media platform on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. And we'll come your way again. We'll bring you more insight as to what's happening within the global politics. I remain Joel. Thank you so much.